The Land of Stories, The Enchantress Returns, Chapter 2 is started with a dog. A few months ago, Buster, the border collie, was rescued from the local animal shelter and given to the Bailey family. He was a gift from Dr. Robert Gordon, whom Charlotte worked with at the hospital, and who had become a close family friend. Dr. Bob, as the twins called him when he occasionally came over for dinner, was a kind man whose face settled into a natural smile. He was balding and not very tall, but had big, caring eyes that made him an instant friend to anyone he met. "Oh, Bob, you shouldn't have," Charlotte said as soon as he surprised them with the canine. "What's up with the pooch?" Connor said when he came to see what the ruckus was about. "He's all yours," Bob said. "Your mom is always talking about the border collie she had when she was a little girl. She's always secretly wanted another one. I was volunteering at the animal shelter, and as soon as I saw him, I knew I had to adopt him for you guys." "We have a dog?" Connor exclaimed. Although the words came out of his mouth, he hadn't fully grasped the reality of it. "I suppose we do," Charlotte said. Connor immediately fell to the floor and started rolling around with his new pet. "We have a dog! We have a dog!" he exclaimed. "Finally, our suburban lives are complete. Thank you, Dr. Bob." "You're very welcome," Dr. Bob said. "What's your name, boy?" Connor asked. "Buster," Bob told him. "At least that's what they called him at the shelter." The black and white dog was obnoxiously happy and had bright green eyes, one of which was larger than the other. Bob had placed a red bandana around Buster's collar. Connor hugged him and almost cried tears of joy. "I know we just met, Buster, but I feel like I've loved you my entire life," he said. "Who's this?" Alex asked when she came to see what was causing all the excitement. "This is my dog, Buster," Connor said. He took off one of his socks and he and Buster played tug-of-war with it. "He's for all of you," Bob corrected him. "Connor, don't use good socks," Charlotte said. Alex unintentionally let out a high-pitched squeal and her mouth dropped open. "We have a dog?" she asked and jumped up and down. Something about Buster made the twins act like they were 10 again. "Yes, we have a dog," Charlotte said and shared her smile. "Don't be disappointed if he likes me more, Alex," Connor said matter-of-factly. "Dogs tend to bond with boys more. It's proven science, I think." "Buster, come here," Alex said. Buster ran straight to Alex's side and happily whimpered up to her. "Ugh, never mind," Connor said, a little disappointed. The twins were so excited to get a dog, they never questioned the gift for a second. They were so distracted playing with the new addition to their family that they didn't see Charlotte giving Bob a long, thankful hug, an embrace that lasted too long to just be a friendly gesture. But as time went on and the twins saw more of Bob, they were forced to notice the signs that their mother and the doctor were more than just friends. Connor sat Alex down at the kitchen table as soon as they walked through the door. Although he saw them every day, Buster couldn't contain his excitement for the twins both being home. He jumped up and down and spun in circles around the kitchen. "Buster, calm down," Connor ordered. "I swear that dog needs to be on medication." "What's going on, Connor?" Alex asked. "You love that dog as much as he loves you." "That was before I discovered Buster was a bribe," Connor immediately declared. "Take a look at this." Connor retrieved a beautiful bouquet of dozen long-stem roses from the kitchen counter. He placed them on the table directly in front of Alex. "Those are beautiful. Where are they from?" Alex asked. "They were delivered when I got home from school," Connor said. "They're for Mom, from Bob." Alex's eyes widened. "Oh dear," she said and gulped. "Well, that's very sweet of him." "Sweet?" Connor said loudly. "This isn't sweet, Alex. It's downright romantic." "Connor, you don't know he meant it in that way," Alex said. "People send other people flowers all the time." Connor searched through the bouquet. "Daisies are friendly. Sunflowers are friendly. A Venus flytrap is friendly. But red roses means romance," he said, and he sent a card. "It's in here somewhere. I read it like 100 times before I threw it back in there. Here it is. Read it." He passed a small card to his sister, and to her horror, it was heart-shaped. She looked down at it like it had the results to an exam she knew she had flunked. "I don't want to read it," Alex said. I don't want to invade Mom's privacy. Ugh, then I'll read it to you, Connor said and tried snatching the card out of her hands. Fine, I'll read it, Alex said, and reluctantly opened the card. Charlotte, happy 6 months, XOXO, Bob. Alex quickly closed the card as if she was trying to stop the truth from escaping it. Connor leaned close to his sister and studied her face, waiting for a reaction to surface. Well, Connor said. Well, Alex said as she ran through a dozen unlikely theories. We don't know that this means they're in a relationship. Connor threw his hands into the air and paced around the kitchen. Alex, don't do that, he said, pointing his finger at her. Don't do what? She said. That thing you do when you try to ignore a situation by making light of it, he said. Connor, I think you're overreacting. Face it, Alex. We're being blinded by a border collie, Connor exclaimed loud enough for the neighbors to hear him. Mom has a boyfriend. Hearing mom and boyfriend made Alex squirm. In her opinion, the two words didn't belong in the same dictionary, let alone the same sentence. I'm not going to get too worked up about something until I hear it from Mom herself, Alex said. What more proof do you need? Connor said. Mom got a dozen roses delivered with a heart-shaped card specifying an amount of time. What do you think 6 months means? Do you think Mom and Bob joined a bowling league and didn't tell us? Both of their heads abruptly turned in the same direction when they heard the garage door open. Charlotte was finally home from work. Ask her, Alex mouthed at her brother. You ask her, Connor mouthed back at her. Charlotte stepped inside a few moments later. She was still dressed in her blue scrubs from the hospital and carried a bag of groceries. She walked right by the flowers on the table without noticing them. Hey guys, sorry I'm late, Charlotte said. I stopped by the store on the way home to pick up something for dinner. I'm starving. I was thinking of making a chicken and rice something or other. Sounds good? Are you too hungry? Charlotte looked up when the twins stayed silent. What's wrong? She asked. Are you okay? Wait, where did those flowers come from? They're from your boyfriend, Connor said. In the 13 years of being her children, Alex and Connor could count on one hand how many times they had seen their mother become speechless. This was one of those times. Oh, Charlotte looked like a deer in headlights. You have a lot of explaining to do, Connor said and crossed his arms. You should probably have a seat. I'm sorry. Did someone promote you to parent? Charlotte said and glared at her son. Sorry, Connor said and lowered his head. I just think we need to talk about this. Is it true? Alex asked with a half-concerned, half-horrified expression. Yes, Charlotte said with difficulty. Bob and I have been seeing each other. Connor slid into a seat next to his sister. Alex's forehead hit the table. I was going to tell you, Charlotte said. I was just waiting. Let me guess, until we were older? Connor asked. If only I had a nickel for every time we heard that. Alex, watch out. We may be 2/3 of a set of triplets, but won't know until we're 30. Charlotte closed her eyes tightly and let out a deep breath. Actually, I was waiting until I could figure out how to tell you, she said softly. You guys have been so worried about not seeing your grandmother, I didn't want to add anything to your plate. She took a seat and let the news sink in for a moment. I know this is hard to swallow, Charlotte said. Hard to swallow? We need an emotional hemorrhage, Mom, Connor said. I actually think finding out our grandmother is a fairy in another dimension was easier to process than this, Alex added. Charlotte's eyes fell sadly to her hands. The twins didn't mean to make her feel bad, but they were feeling so many things they were forgetting to be considerate. Bob and I have known each other for a very long time, Charlotte said. When your dad died, he became a very good friend. He was one of the few people I could talk to about everything that I was going through. Did you know Bob's wife died just a year before your dad? Both of the twins shook their heads. You could have talked to us, Connor said. No, I couldn't, Charlotte said. I needed another adult to confide in. You'll understand one day when you have kids. Bob and I each knew what the other one was going through. We talked every day at work and became very close, and recently that friendship has grown. The twins couldn't decide if what she was saying was helpful or making it all worse. The more she explained, the more real it became. What about Dad? Alex said. Your and Dad's story was so literally a fairy tale, Mom. He traveled from a different world to be with you. Don't you still love him? The question was heartbreaking for all of them, especially Charlotte. Your father was the love of my life and will always be, Charlotte said, and these years without him have been the hardest of my entire life. We were married for 12 years, and in that time we talked about a lot of things, a lot of possibilities. I know for a fact that if I spent another year missing your father, he would be disappointed in me. He would want me to move on as much as I would want him to move on if the roles were reversed. It was a promise we made to each other. Charlotte went silent for a moment before continuing. The first year after he died, I thought I never would be able to move on, she said. I thought a part of me died with him and I would never be able to love anyone again. But then Bob told me, and his wife had made the same promises to each other just before she passed away, and he felt the same way. For some reason, knowing just someone else was in the same boat as me made everything feel so much better. The twins shared a hopeless glance, knowing there was nothing they could do to ease their mother's heartache. I know this is difficult for you too, Charlotte said. I'm not saying you need to be okay with it. You can feel however you want, and rightfully so. Just know that Bob makes me really happy, and it's been a long time since I have felt this way. Connor unsuccessfully tried keeping a question that popped up in his mind to himself. Connor, what's your question? Charlotte asked and dabbed the corners of her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. I don't have a question, Connor said and shook his head unconvincingly. Yes, you do, Charlotte said, knowing her son better than he knew himself. You always purse your lips like that when you have something to ask. Connor immediately repositioned his mouth. It's okay, honey, you can ask me anything, she said. It's really childish and lame, Connor warned. I guess it's something I've always wondered about people who lose their husband or wives, but one day when we're all in, well, heaven, I guess, isn't it going to be a little awkward with Bob and Dad there? Alex was about to let out a disapproving sigh, but held it in, even though she had admitted it was a decent question. Although she felt horrible for feeling it, a part of her felt like her mom was being unfaithful to her dad. A smile came to Charlotte's face, and she let out a soft laugh. Oh, honey, if there's ever a time or place when we're all together again, I imagine we'd be too happy to let things be awkward. Alex and Connor looked at each other and knew they were both thinking the same thing. The thought of their family being together again made them both smile. Charlotte placed her hands on the tops of theirs on the table. Nothing any of us do will ever bring your dad back, she said, and nothing we do will ever push him further away either. He'll always be with us in our hearts, no matter what. I guess putting it that way makes me feel better, Connor said. Me too, Alex said. I'm glad to hear it, Charlotte said and smiled at them. She got up from the table and grabbed her car keys. I don't feel like cooking tonight. Let's go get pizza instead. It's good to eat something heavy after a heavy conversation. Chapter 3. Lunch in the Library. The next day at school, Alex was still having a hard time digesting the conversation and the pizza from the night before. The news of her mother's new relationship was a heavy thing to process and did nothing to help the gloomy state she was already in. She felt like she was slowly losing control over everything in her life, and she hated it. Alex desperately needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't her mom or her brother, but an outside source who could hug her and tell her everything was going to be all right. She needed her grandmother. She would have given anything just to see her face again. However, since that was impossible at the moment, Alex settled on seeing a form of her grandmother instead. At lunch, she went to one of her favorite places in the world, the school library. Hi, Alex, the librarian said as Alex passed her desk. You'll be happy to know I just ordered a new set of encyclopedias. Really? Alex said. That's wonderful. She smiled for the first time all day. It faded a second later after she realized new encyclopedias was the most exciting news she had had in weeks. Thank you for your enthusiasm, the librarian said. Earlier today, I told another student I was getting new encyclopedias. He asked me how long I'd been in the hospital. Can you believe that? Times are definitely changing. They sure are, Alex said under her breath. Alex went to the very last aisle of books, where the children's literature was kept. Students weren't allowed to check out these books, as they were mostly used as a reference for the English classes. From the top shelf, Alex pulled down an old book that was several hundred pages thick. It was exactly where she had left it on her last visit to the library. A treasury of classic fairy tales was written across its brown cover. It wasn't much to look at and didn't have nearly as many majestic charm as her grandmother's Land of Stories book, but it had become Alex's favorite book to visit in the library. She looked around to make sure no one was watching her. Besides the librarian, who was busy at her computer, she had the library to herself. Alex opened the book and flipped through the pages. She skimmed through the illustrations of Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, of Rapunzel and Red Riding Hood, and of Goldilocks and Jack and the Beanstalk. Surprisingly, they were accurate depictions of people she had met a year ago in the fairy tale world. Alex finally found Cinderella and came across the picture she wanted to see the most, an illustration of the fairy godmother. Alex couldn't help but chuckle under her breath every time she saw it. The artist's version of the fairy godmother couldn't have been further from what her grandmother looked like. In this book, she was a tall and voluptuous woman with big lips, wings, long blonde hair, and a large golden crown. However inaccurate it was technically still her grandmother, and that was all Alex needed to see. "Hi, Grandma," Alex said quietly to the book. "You look great. I like your crown and your wings. It's funny how different you look in every book I read. Are they just dramatic interpretations, or have your style changed over the years?" The fairy godmother was just a young fairy living in the fairy tale world when she discovered there was another world. She was the first and only person in the history of both worlds capable of traveling between the two at will. She will never understood why she was given such a gift. But magic has always had a mind of its own. The world was a very dark place during her first visits. In the beginning of the Middle Ages, the war and plague were everywhere she looked. The fairy godmother told stories of her world to the children she met to brighten their spirits. The tales gave them such hope and joy that she decided to make it her life's work to spread the history of her world in theirs. The fairy godmother eventually enlisted other fairies, including Mother Goose and members of the fairy council, to travel secretly with her and help spread the stories. Hence the name fairy tales. Giving a bit of magic to a world that had little of its own. Over time, the fairies recruited other people, such as the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen, to help keep their stories alive. The two dimensions operated on different time schedules. The fairy tale world moved at a much slower pace compared to the other world. The fairies tried to visit the other world as much as possible, but though only months would pass between visits in the fairy tale world, decades would have passed in the other world. It wasn't until Alex and Connor, the first children belonging to both worlds, were born that the dimensions began moving at the same pace. Alex and Connor were the links that held the two worlds together. And as Alex held the treasury of classic fairy tales in her hands, she could almost feel the power running through her veins. It was no wonder they had loved fairy tales their whole lives. Alex wondered if her grandmother had devoted the last year solely to spread fairy tales around the world, or had something bad happened in the fairy tale world. "Grandma, I don't know what's going on, but I could really use you right now," Alex said to the book. "Everything is changing. Everything is moving in directions I don't like. This whole growing up thing is a lot harder than I ever thought it would be. Not getting to see you makes it unbearable." Alex took another look around the library to make sure she was still alone. She hugged the book as tightly as she could without damaging it and whispered into the top of its spine. "Please let me come back to the Land of Stories," she said. "Please let me join you and the other fairies. If something happened, let me help you. I know I can. Please just send me a sign. Let me know that you're okay." Alex held the book for a few moments more, hoping that maybe today would be the day she would magically transport back into the world she loved so much. But, to her disappointment, she stayed put in the library. Her whispers didn't go entirely unnoticed, however. "If hugging that one doesn't work, try one of these," said a voice from nearby. Startled, Alex dropped the treasury. Down the aisle, seated on the floor with a few stacks of books piled around him, was Connor. Alex had completely missed him. "You scared me," Alex said. She was embarrassed, not knowing what he had and hadn't heard her saying to the inanimate object. "You're lucky I know you, otherwise I probably would have reported you to the school psychologist," Connor said with a mocking but loving smirk. "What are you doing here?" Alex asked him. She walked down the aisle closer to her brother and saw that the majority of the books around him were also different storybooks and fairy tales. Same thing as you, apparently, Connor said, and then snickered to himself. Although I didn't try to get to first base with any of them or anything. Very funny, Alex said and took a seat next to him. Is this your first time ever being in the library? Connor sighed and shrugged his shoulders. I've been in a bit of a funk today. I thought if I came in here and flipped through a couple of these, I'd feel better, he explained. Did it work? Alex asked. For the most part, I'd say, Connor said. Why do you think that is? Well, Alex said, straightening her headband, I read in a zoology book once that certain species of birds and insects that live in trees will climb down and hide in their roots if they ever feel like their home is being threatened. Connor looked at her like she was speaking in tongues. And how is that relevant to this topic? Because, Alex explained, our home is being threatened, things are changing, so here we are in a library reading old fairy tales. We return to our roots. Sure, Connor said, only half understanding her comparison. How can you remember that, but you can never remember the names of singers on the radio? My point is, Alex continued, sometimes all we need to see are a few familiar faces to make us feel comfortable again. Connor nodded. Well, I wouldn't say I saw any familiar faces, he said. He searched through the pile of books and pulled out a couple to show her. Is this the Egyptian version of Cinderella? Grandma is a hawk, he told her excitedly. And in this one, Grandma's not even in it. Cinderella gets her gown and shoes from a tree. Can you believe that? Like a tree could give her a new dress. Please. A complete stranger with a wand is much more believable. We should write letters of complaints, Alex said. Should we sign it as the grandchildren of the fairy godmother? Do you think they'll take it more seriously if we do? They both laughed. Definitely, Connor said. Or personal acquaintances of the long-lost charming prince. I bet no one has ever heard that one before. Both the twins went silent for a moment, and their amusement faded into despair. I miss Froggy, Connor said. I miss saying Froggy. There's not much we can do about it, Alex said. If Grandma wanted us to come back, she would tell us what was going on. Until then, I guess we'll have to keep hugging books. Great, Alex said sarcastically. I wonder what Dad would tell us if he were alive. I don't think there's a story even in his catalog that could help us get through everything we're going through now. Alex had to think about it. Most of her dad's stories had been perfect for their elementary school dilemmas, but what advice would he give them now? I bet he would say that anyone can have a once upon a time or happily ever after. But it's the journey between that makes the story worth telling, Alex said, and how characters face the challenges at hand is what makes them heroes. Yeah, Connor said, something like that. You're good at this. A high-pitched beep sound as an announcement was made over the loudspeaker. Connor Bailey, please report to the principal's office. Connor Bailey, please report to the principal's office. Both of the twins looked up towards the speaker and then at each other. What did you do? Alex asked. I don't know, Connor said with a gulp. He mentally rewound through the past 4 weeks of his life, thinking of anything he had done that could warrant a trip to the principal's office, but found nothing. At least I don't think I did anything. Connor collected his things and put the library books back on the shelves. Wish me luck, he said to his sister. See you after school, I hope. Alex stayed seated on the floor. Discouraging thoughts filled her head. What would happen if she never saw her grandmother again? Would she become a weird, book-hugging lady who traveled from one library to the next? Would her future children believe her when she told them about her connections to the fairy tale world? The bell eventually rang and Alex got to her feet. She picked up the treasury of classic fairy tales from where she had dropped it on the floor and decided to take one last look at the illustration before heading to class. Alex turned the same page she had been talking to before, and to her amazement, the illustration was completely different. Instead of the voluptuous woman with the wings and crown, the picture showed a petite woman with a kind smile and a sky-blue sparkly robe. It was her grandmother! Alex looked around the library in shock as a smile grew on her face. Her grandmother had just sent her a postcard.